I'm joined by Anna Khachiyan. Anna is a cultural commentator and the co-host of the Red Scare podcast, and you've probably heard of her because she is a phenomenon, and you probably love the podcast like I do. So, welcome, Anna.
Thanks for having me, Alex.
Thanks for coming
Doing my
on.
best NPR voice.
It's pretty good. I mean, I'm just imitating people I've seen on TV. That's my whole shtick. So, yeah, welcome. What I wanted to talk to you in particular today is motherhood, because I know you
Hmm.
are a very recent mom. You've maintained your thigh gap throughout, which I've heard is quite the accomplishment. I applaud you. But yeah, how does it feel? How are you settling into this new life?
It's great. It's very hard to articulate because, I mean, there are no words for it. I'm really exhausted and kind of like strung out, brain dead. So if I'm like kind of out of it today, that's why I haven't really had a good night's sleep for the last 2.5 months. But it's actually like, the most wonderful thing that could possibly happen to you. Um, I don't know, the way that you love your child is unlike the love you have for anybody else. Well, I guess you don't know yet, but you're almost there. Yeah. How
Yeah.
far along are you?
I'm 37 weeks now, but
Okay. Yeah.
I
So
look
anytime.
quite
Wow. That's
profoundly
great.
pregnant.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's looming. So
Yeah.
we'll see. But yeah, I'm really excited because I'm kind of, you've already crossed the threshold to this new life, and
Yeah.
I think there's also a lot of overlap with, some important conversations that people are either having or not really having nowadays about, what it means to have a family, what it means
Yeah.
to be a mother, what it means to even want to have children, which is, I don't know. To me, it was a bit of a strange thing until maybe my mid 20s. It never even crossed my mind that I might want to have children at one point.
Right.
Yeah, it was just, I don't know. I just one of those very nihilistic people, typical nihilists. I'm curious what you think about, positive reasons for people to actually want to have children. Because for me, living in kind of a metropolitan area of, London, I guess it has kind of a similar vibe to New York as well.
Hmm.
It's there weren't that many reasons to have children. Like, people weren't really
Right.
that into the whole idea. So, why do you think it's, I don't know, these places are so barren?
Well, I mean, I don't remember where I read this, but there's that statistic that, like, in San Francisco, for example, there are more dogs than children now, fur
Mm.
babies, as we call them, which is like, really shocking. And of course, I've repeated this line many times over, but I love this kind of quote from this short story by Delicious Tacos, where the main character is like on a dating app and he's messaging with like a 38-year-old project manager. And there's this great line where he talks about like when women have a large dog, that's a man proxy, and when they have a small dog, that's like a baby proxy. But I think, like, in the past, people didn't really put any thought into having children. They just automatically, like, it was assumed that that's what you would do, and they did. And I don't think that it was necessarily like pre-planned or over-examined. I think people kind of our demographic, of our age, have the luxury to really think about whether we want to have children, and very often that luxury is actually not a luxury at all, and it's a kind of like nightmare situation because you really like realize that you have, a great lifestyle, and it's very hard to give it up. And also, you can't anticipate what it's going to be like giving it up until you actually do it.
Yeah.
So I think, like, a lot of this, among people who do have disposable income, who are kind of like urban uh, tech or media elites, a lot of this idea that you can't afford to have a child, for example, is really a cover for the fact that you don't want to take a hit to your lifestyle, which is something, of course, that I had thought about.
Yeah, yeah, it's kind of getting demoted from your own life, and also having to change lifestyles quite radically because these cities are not built for children. They're built for, being a media elite with disposable income.
Right.
Yeah, and that's why, at least in my experience, the whole argument that this is all about material incentives and owning property. I mean, a lot of people that I know that didn't have children, and even in their 30s in these urban environments, they did end up owning property, and
Mm-hmm.
they still didn't have children. So it is. I think it's more of a, like you said, a lifestyle issue.
Yeah, and I noticed, when I got pregnant, it was kind of the start of the lockdowns. A lot of women I knew also got pregnant simultaneously, and so I kind of mistakenly thought that there would be a boom. But of course, this boom was kind of strictly among kind of white, middle class, upper middle class, uh, urban people with disposable income. And in fact, there was a New York Times headline like a week ago talking about how actually what we thought was going to be a baby boom was a baby bust during kind of COVID.
Yeah, yeah, it's the same. Like my inner circle also have been having babies in a in a frenzy, and I was like, yes, finally we repopulate the planet. But I
Yeah.
actually, I guess the people who typically have a high fertility rate, those have gotten hit a bit
Yeah.
more harshly by everything that's going on right now.
Oh, I think the baby's crying. I'm gonna adjust
No
him. I'll be
worries,
right back.
go go.
Yeah, I'm sorry. What were you saying?
Yeah, no worries. We can respawn the combo because I zoned out as well. Like
Mm-hmm.
I've got total pregnancy brain and it's so hot, like sweltering here, and I've got my edema, so we're both in our particular situations.
Yeah.
But yeah, I also want to ask you about family and about your family, because
Uh-huh.
I've been listening to a few of your podcasts before this, where you appeared as a guest on other people's podcasts, and you were telling these anecdotes from your family, and I couldn't help but notice how similar the kind of the trajectories have been.
Mm-hmm.
Like including this, I mean, maybe it's a bit too nosy and a bit dark, but like I think our fathers died the same year,
Oh,
and
wow. Okay.
and
Yeah.
they were both kind of these like highly, kind of technical, super, big brained, kind of
Yeah.
Soviet Union engineering types, mathematician types. And our mothers are kind of the same as well. They're artistic types that, were kind
Mm-hmm.
of relegated to a homebody
Mm-hmm.
position. And I've got some issues, personality disorders in my family, so it's quite it was quite interesting. Like, okay, this is quite a convergence, and I wonder, do you think that this background, like, how has that influenced your position at the moment? How do you see kind of your family reflecting on the point that you've reached in your life right now, and with your family as well?
Uh, I think the part of my reason for having a child, this pregnancy was unplanned, obviously, but um, my reasoning for seeing it through was because I want to kind of pay homage to honor the memory of my father. Oh God, here he goes again. I don't. Can you hear him on the? Is it
Yeah,
really loud? Okay.
it's
Let me think. Maybe what I can do probably is I can put him in like a little uh, strappy thing, like a
yeah,
little carrier. If you
for
don't mind,
sure.
I'm really
No, no,
sorry that
no,
he's
no,
being, yeah.
no worries at all.
And then I'll answer the question. Yeah.
I'm back. Cool.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. I
Nice.
felt like a debt to my family, and I felt like I had to honor kind of my past. I take, probably because I'm an immigrant to the United States. Like I said this to the like Russians with attitude guys. I think like being an immigrant is a state of overcompensation. Like you're always overcompensating, you know, in both directions. Like you want to kind of hyper assimilate to your new culture, but you also want to kind of retain and remember your old culture. So I feel like I'm, as an immigrant, I'm like very hyper aware of my background, and it's kind of, it's always been kind of like a grave, serious thing for me because my dad's side, are Armenians. We think that they're originally from Iran. They, on that side, we had like the Armenian genocide. On my mom's side, she's part Russian Jewish, part Slavic. And, our family, part of our family was killed in Auschwitz. The other family was what we call Kristjanie, serfs on the Slavic side. So it's a really kind of remarkable history of, as they say, overcoming adversity or whatever. So I felt kind of that maintaining this lineage was kind of necessary.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that makes a lot of sense if you're kind of tracing your legacy back to roots that are that deep. And I can completely mirror that. Like I was also very much attached to my father's memory, and
Mm-hmm.
yeah, there's not a day that goes by where I don't think, okay, it would be very very great to have him here, and convince him that I wasn't a fuck up, which is
Yeah.
I was 17 when he died, and it was like I was a total fuck up at 17, obviously, and that's
Yeah.
kind of the
Uh,
last memory he had of me. So yeah, it makes a lot of sense. Wait a
yeah.
minute.
And I think like, um, I was 19 when my dad died, and I was just getting kind of reforming myself. I was a very kind of shitty, mediocre student, and up until the last bit of high school, when for by some stroke of inspiration, I decided to turn it all around, and I wanted to like make my father proud. And it's very sad. I think about this all the time because my partner's father also passed away, and was they actually had the same birthday, so there's like some weird Jungian connection there. And I think a lot that this child is going to grow up without grandfathers. But he lives in New York. He has the sort of life that I could have only dreamed of. And his family network is basically a community like of friends. It sounds very Prague. That's a verb.
He's adorable, even from this convoluted angle. Um, yeah, that's to be honest, that's the same with me. I was dating this very this guy my dad hated, obviously, at 17, and that was kind
Mhm.
of the way we ended it, and that was yeah, unfortunately not the best. But yeah, I completely echo that. A lot of the stuff that I've done later in my life has been kind of trying to align myself with what I think would have made him proud. But
Yeah, was your dad like a scientist, a mathematician? What
Um,
was it?
he was a kind of he was a hydrothermal. He was building hydrothermal dams, no, hydroelectric
Okay,
dams,
gotcha.
all over
Okay,
the Soviet Union. So he was kind of like
okay.
this peak engineering man.
Uh-huh.
And then after the wall fell, he got into he went to the west and did, I don't know, construction business, and
Uh-huh.
yeah, he was very very good at business as well. Like yeah, just a kind of a polymath. And my mom as well. She was a very artistic soul, and
Yeah.
yeah, and then she got stuck indoors for a bit too long and started getting antsy. Um,
Yeah.
but it's yeah, it was interesting to me that it's because we've kind of converged on a few themes throughout life, just in terms of experience, because I feel
Hmm.
like a lot of the things that you speak about are things that you've kind of felt, not only in the culture but just in what's
Right.
in what's going on, kind of almost like on a visceral level, and it feels like, okay, your experience maybe also in your family informs that.
Yeah, definitely. I think, wait, hold on a second. I'm gonna plug my computer and I'm sorry this is such a disastrous photo.
No worries.
Um, yeah, I mean, again, like I said, I have like a very, I guess, hyperactive awareness of the past because, for whatever reason, my parents were able to preserve a lot of information. Like we have photographs from like the beginning of the 20th century and documents and stuff like that. So we have like a vague, especially on the Jewish side, because they were kind of like bourgeois members of the medical establishment who I think, if I'm correct, were did not have to settle in the Pale because they were kind of elite professionals. So that kind of stuff is like super important to me. But on the other hand, also, I think about like the kind of dialogue, the discourse that exists now, um, that I would call it like antinatalist when people talk about, well, it's narcissistic, it's selfish to bring a child into this world for like population reasons or environmental reasons or whatever. And I think that, no matter how you slice it or dice it, it's going to be, narcissistic, right? If you don't have children, that's also, in my mind, an act of selfishness, of narcissism. Um, but my mother, interestingly enough, she's very much like a boomer through and through. So she comes out of this kind of like middle class, Western centric background. And I remember as a young girl, my mother telling my sister and me basically strongly implying that actually we shouldn't have children. We should self actualize, be feminists, and that sort of thing. And so a lot of the stuff that I grew up thinking I wanted was really, I think, my mother's kind of passed down inner voice.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it took me many years, a decade and a half to decide essentially that I wanted a child because my mother was always all about like getting a job, being a feminist, scaling the greasy ladder or whatever. And I don't know that she necessarily even had thought about it. I think a lot of our like thought processes are very unexamined.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it was the same in my case as well. It was all about independence because my parents had two extremely powerful egos battling each other
Yeah.
every day, and I think my mother felt really disempowered by the fact that she wasn't like a high flying professional,
Mm-hmm.
kicking ass and taking names like my dad was, and she was kind of relegated to this passive role, though she was like this highly intelligent, really worldly person who now
Yeah.
had to not do much, or at least not do much in the world, in the outside world. So she kind of encouraged me to you have to become this person that I didn't get the chance to be, because I'm in this ego battle to the death here. Yeah, it's an interesting thing, like you say, living out your parents' dreams, even involuntarily. It's not
Mm-hmm.
just doesn't have to be, because sometimes if you'd ask my mother, she'd say I've only been rebelling against her my whole life, but actually, I've I've been in her footsteps. I've been two steps behind her at every
Yeah.
turn. Yeah,
Well, the funny thing is also like you realize, obviously, uh, in a delayed fashion, that actually your parents were right all along, and you essentially become your parents.
yeah, and you shouldn't fight it too much,
No.
because
Well, you
fighting
should
it.
when you're young. I think it's sort of inevitable that everybody, when they're young, kind of fights it. And, now that I'm like an old broad and I have a kid, um, it's, I try to talk to younger people, and, it's very hard to get this point across to them because they literally don't know, and they're not going to know for a long time. So you can't really force the issue. You have to like let people, come to their own conclusions.
Yeah, yeah, there is that as well. Like even with having children now, people keep asking me like, okay, so how will you indoctrinate your child? How are you going to protect him from non-baseness? And I
Yeah.
can't. You just can't. You can kind of provide an example, but I don't think you can force your worldview into your child in any effective way.
Have you given it any thought how you're gonna indoctrinate your child, or are you just gonna wing it?
Probably wing it.
Yeah.
I'll probably say that I'll give it a lot of thought, but I think I'm just going to take it day by day and just try to, I don't know, provide To me it feels like, okay, if I give this child, a loving environment, stable, try to, be the kind of person that I want him to be, that's probably the best I could do. And then, I'm involved in all sorts of, intellectual fields. If he's interested in that type of stuff, I got a whole
Mhm.
library here with stuff that you
Yeah.
might want to chat about. But I don't necessarily think I'll be going to be very proactive in making like a 10-point list of him to learn about values in the world.
Yeah. No CRT, no HRT. No, I mean, I think like you basically, like my philosophy is you have to lead by example. I think that that's where like my parents failed because they were so frazzled and so overwhelmed, uh, like coming to a new country. And I want to give my child what I didn't have growing up, which is essentially kind of a loving and supportive network of family and friends. Um, because my sister and I always joke that we sort of grew up very isolated. We were an island, like a nuclear family, and I think that that made things very difficult for us to kind of advance normally through life. And so the kind of dilemma for me is I want to give this child kind of the resources, the support that I didn't necessarily have. But if you give a child those things, then he, might grow up to be the sort of like spoiled and entitled person
Yeah.
that, I observe people like this around New York all the time. And I'm terrified of, raising my child to be one of these people. I guess to be what people on the internet think I am, which is like a spoiled and entitled brat.
Yeah, I think that's always the worry, that you don't give your child, that hormetic dose of insanity that it needs to become at least an interesting person, or at least a non NPC character in the
Yeah.
world. Yeah, yeah, I wonder that as well. Like I'm sure I'm gonna mess it up. I'm sure I'm gonna mess it up in exotic ways, in ways I can't even imagine at the
Well,
moment.
yeah, I think like going into it, like no matter what you do, you're gonna fuck up your kid. Like I hate to say it, but um, on the other hand, um, I think that it's again the leading by example thing is like very very important. And there's this like very corny quote by Dr. Maya Angelou, um, where she talks about it's not what you say or what you do, but it's how you make people feel at the end of the day that matters. And so I think with children, the example that you have to set is one of kind of calm, stability, and confidence, because a lot of parents, I think probably, especially like fight amongst themselves, snipe at one another. And I remember, my grandparents growing up had this policy, that they called NP, which was like, basically keeping a unified front, maintaining social harmony in front of the children at all times, even if they were, privately scrapping or having a disagreement.
Yeah, I feel like the boomers skipped the NP, whatever that stands
Yeah,
for.
yeah,
Yeah, that's they said, okay, it's time to bring all of our, bring your whole self to work, bring your whole self to the
yeah.
family unit, and I don't necessarily know if that was a good move. Yeah, I think it's, just the instability of it was just, yeah, a bit too
My
much.
my question is will our generation, I guess it's a little bit late for our generation of millennials, but um, will young women, young in their early 20s, mid 20s, will they be rebelling against their parents and having children earlier? I don't know. I mean, I saw somebody kind of predicting that the next generation of women will do the childbirth first and the career second, like they'll invert the kind of old formula, um, that's been popular for the last 3 decades. But I don't know if that's the case. I think that these kind of ideas, values are very much internalized in people.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. I think you'd need like a huge sea change to make that happen, in material terms as well, because a lot of people, this is what everyone in their age cohort does. This is what everyone after, these are the steps of our generation, and you
Mm-hmm.
need to, reevaluate what it means to end, to finish high school, or, to
Right.
take college off its pedestal. Like, oh my God, that's going to take a few more generations. Yeah, I mean, I'm hopeful that people will kind of get startled by the disaster that, kind of the elder millennial generation was for women, who've
Mm-hmm.
just, yeah, a lot of them have really, they don't really have any way to backtrack from a direction that they're on, and they will be some form of example to, I guess, Zoomer girls, that the Chelsea Handler, end
Mm-hmm.
of the line lifestyle has just been too violent, and they don't want that. But how to actually structure your life to remedy that, I think that's much more complicated. And because it's not just getting scared of what might happen, but also having a very proactive way of doing the opposite, and also having someone to do it with. Because
Mm-hmm.
I feel like app dating and all of this stuff has really poisoned the waters in terms of what's possible with the opposite sex as well.
Yeah, yeah, I think so too. I like a lot of, people will accuse me of like being trad or whatever. I kind of deny this fact. I'm not trad because, to me, trad means looking at the past, which is always going to be like a figment, a fantasy in your mind, and saying that it's kind of uniformly, unambiguously better than what we have in the present. I don't know that that's the case. I think, like I said, sort of time tested, time worn things are most likely better than what we have now. But on a lot of things, on a lot of these things, the jury's out, and there's a massive now paradigm shift. Like you said, it's very hard to find a partner to mate with if you wanted to, procreate. There's also the issue that, again, among kind of high achieving urban women, the those women are kind of probably now earning more than their male counterparts. There's like this massive paradigm shift that's very hard to reconcile, because I think our brains are hardwired kind of in, you know in past kind of, in a kind of an old legacy format. Like, you want to be with a man who earns more than you, for example, if you're a woman, to be a supporter or a provider, and that is a model that's becoming increasingly less possible.
Yeah.
And I have to say also, like, as far as like, my career goes, I'm one of the lucky ones, because, by a fluke, by the grace of God, I found a man who is able to provide for us should I, suddenly lose my job or my career if I opt out of it. Um, but I don't hold out any hope. Like, I think the more kind of credentialed and accomplished that you get as a woman, the less attractive on some level you become to the sort of men that you would want to date.
Yeah, yeah. The whole landscape shifts because especially if you are extremely successful, then yeah, it's just the available space is shrunken to almost nothing.
Mm-hmm.
And it does take a little bit of time to become extremely successful, and by that time you're probably already in your 30s or sometimes in your 40s, and
Right.
really kind of put all of your stock in this direction to be able to do it, which is, yeah,
Mm-hmm.
which is, I see so many women in that situation, and they are genuinely surprised of how fast life comes at you at one point, and it's it just doesn't work out. And they also kind of mimic the idea that if this is an attractive quality in men, being a high status achieving person, then that's going to help them with men as well. It's completely brain dead, because
Not
that's,
true. Yeah.
yeah, that doesn't men don't work like that.
Yeah. 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 I mean, I'm sure. Like, I think my prospects, believe it or not, were probably better when I was like waitressing and hostessing, because the amount of male attention was overwhelming, because men would come into the restaurant and like flirt with you. When you're in one of these like high achieving, um, tunnel vision career paths, you don't even really get a chance to meet like high quality men, I think.
Yeah, especially because you meet most of the men at work, which is now a no-go zone for
Yeah,
romance.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
yeah, so which you shouldn't, because who knows what what disasters you create with that. Yeah, it's really a dead end, and a lot of the reason that I'm kind of speaking out about this stuff is that I've kind of seen it happen in real time with a lot of my female friends, and it's
Hmm.
just, it's I tweet about the stuff that I couldn't tell them to their faces.
Uh-huh.
And a lot of them have blocked me and disavowed me, obviously, but because they know. But it's yeah, it's unfortunate. I also have a kind of a Palia quote that I wanted to present to you about
Sure.
being the mother of a boy,
Uh-huh.
because yeah, we were both. I'm going to have a boy as well, and I've been thinking about this as well.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Um,
I'm
uh,
raising my son gender neutral.
oh
Just
no.
kidding.
No, yeah, he'll decide his gender at 18. So the quote goes like this: "Every man must define his identity against his mother. If he does not, he just falls back into her and is swallowed up," which is kind of this, devouring mother
Hmm.
archetype. And I feel like this is really encouraged by society at the moment. This is kind of the archetype that almost society at large inhabits. But it's also kind of a fear for me because I know I
Hmm.
will tend to want to be that kind of person. So I
Hmm.
don't know, what's your relationship to the devouring mother, and kind of in your relationship with your son?
You mean that you fear your own tendency to become like a devouring or edible mother?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, okay, the fact that you even have that forethought is probably a good sign. Um, yeah, I guess, I also have and had that same fear. Um, there's this idea. I actually read an article about narcissistic mothers and how they will compete with and belittle their daughters, but be kind of emotionally incestuous with their sons. And um, I think, like, no disrespect, no dishonor to my mother, but she was such an oddball character and she was such a consuming and devouring force in my life that as a result, I'm very boring and very dependable and very hyper self aware to a degree that's like paralytic, Um, but I think this bodes well for parenting because, as painful as it is for me to anticipate like separating from my son, I have no choice. And I think like I will always kind of take that L. So I can't imagine because I have ultimately, Russian parents, I think, are known, my parents especially, and a lot of the parents of like Russian kids I knew growing up, we would laugh about the fact that our parents consistently denied us our subjectivity, our autonomy. In America, I think the opposite rule reigns. Your parents, I think, out of negligence more than love, give you full reign
Mm-hmm.
to express yourself, and they constantly pay lip service to your subjectivity, to your autonomy, which creates, basically spoiled and coddled brats. And I actually am fairly optimistic that I will be able to find a kind of happy medium to allow my son to kind of rebel constructively. I mean, I can already anticipate just like the uh, kind of pain and sadness of inevitably being rejected by your adolescent child, which is, what's going to happen at some point. Because I remember myself, I was a horrible bitch to my parents.
Yeah.
So I think like that I'm not too worried about. And again, I feel like if you have the kind of foresight of this phenomenon, you can sort of like nip it in the bud.
Yeah, I think like if you have experience with people with either, personality disorders or things like BPD, especially kind of in a kind of parenting role,
Yeah.
you become a bit of a wrangler of these types of emotions, either in other people and then you notice them in yourself. And by yourself I mean myself, because that's kind of like, because
Yeah.
I know I have like the genes for it. I know that it's bubbling underneath the surface, but I've also kind of being on the receiving end of what it means to be growing up in kind of that completely chaotic medium. It's like, okay, this is you need to ride the tiger, and you need to control it, because it can be really wild. Yeah, I think it's in a way, by being a really calm and dependable mother, you're probably, like you said, you're gonna rob your son of the chance to wrangle you.
Yeah. I mean, either way, yeah, no matter what you do, you're going to do something wrong. I think like the good news is like I've heard on numerous occasions from numerous channels that basically like if you are the daughter of kind of like an insane or abusive mother, chances are that you will be a very kind of like dependable, even keeled mother. I think, my mom was so kind of nuts growing up because she's really kind of an artistic personality. She's like a Gemini also.
Hmm.
Um, and growing up with her was like what I imagine like growing up with like Donald Trump or Azalea Banks is, like just like high levels of brilliance. Um, but I forgot where I was going with this, but I think like because as a result of her parenting, my sister and I are just like so conservative. I don't mean like politically conservative. I mean like privately, socially conservative.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's that seems to be a pattern. To be honest, it's just there's no space in a house like that for two big egos, and you learn that early on. I've tried to have a big ego when I was a teenager, but it's just
Mm-hmm.
like a Sisyphean task. You're not gonna you're not gonna
Yeah.
beat that, and after a while you just kind of calm down and live your life.
Well, and also, to my mom's credit, I have to say that the thing that she did really well, that a lot of parents of her generation did well, I think, was she really did raise us gender neutral in the sense that she didn't foist any sort of labels or identities on us because that sort of concept didn't exist. Um, and, she didn't expect us to be like dolled up or over sexual. And I think again, as a result, we really got to figure out ourselves in an organic, natural fashion, and that was the norm growing up. I think like this idea right now that this kind of like gender play idea that exists, where people are kind of uh, imposing non-binary or like trans identities on their children, that to me always seems so kind of outlandishly harmful because and selfish and narcissistic, um, because you know you should already as a default raise your kid without kind of gender roles in mind because the majority of them will just snap into place.
Yeah, I think it's, this essentializing tendency, to see, in a way, yeah, gender is constructed, but it's also something you feel like deep inside your soul. And
Yeah.
everyone's very confused about what it is to actually have gender at the moment. And yeah, it's not a straightforward thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I also wanted to ask you about women in general. Is it do they are they ever meant to be sane? I think there is something that you know there's a nucleus of insanity that it has to be. You kind of have to keep it alive if you want to be
Yeah.
a just a normal woman. You can't snuff it out completely.
Yeah, I think like that, like a little kernel, a nugget of insanity is what gives women their sex appeal on some level. I mean, I don't know. I'm of two minds about this because I think maybe that's what makes them attractive to men, being a little crazy or playing up their crazy, um, being kind of responsibly manipulative. But on the other hand, I think sanity is probably the hottest quality in a person, at least for me. And I think a lot of the insanity, craziness that we're witnessing is really smoothed out by childbirth and child rearing because, frankly, it's like very obvious you have to now subordinate your will to somebody else.
Yeah. Yeah, you can't maintain the illusion of being a complete individual when you're essentially two people at the same time. It's
Yeah.
it's quite, I don't know, it's quite a trippy experience to know that you're essentially, I don't know, I don't want to say birthing pod, but you're kind of, you're facilitating a different personality, a different person, which is also
Yeah.
yourself at the same time. I don't know. I've just been thinking about this, staring up into the abyss about this quite a lot lately.
Well, I mean, I'm sure you feel this way now because you're like heavily pregnant. When I was like on kind of at the end of my pregnancy, I mean, even like when I started showing, I remember thinking like, my God, I'm not myself anymore. I'm literally a vessel for somebody else. And then you become like a pair of udders for somebody else. You are like a fount of sustenance. And it's very kind of like body horror. But, I thought like, well, okay, whatever, no matter what happens to me, I have this child that I have to take care of that is like the future. Um, I think, the problem with kind of American style liberalism is that it doesn't invest in the future. It has a contempt for the future. Children are the future and you have to invest in them. And we have like here such low standards for the things that matter.
Yeah. And it's also, it's very hard for someone who's really invested in this idea of the individual, of, being kind of this rational choice agent, minding their own business, to be invested in the future, because the individual does not have a future. You
Right.
individually, you will die. There's nothing. Maybe you can build a legacy by doing something creative, or writing a book, or whatever, winning a war, or something that might outlive you for 5 minutes. But the idea that you're going to perpetuate the individual is not, it's not going to happen. You have to become more than yourself to even countenance the idea that you're going to have a child.
Well, I think a lot of people of our generation of millennials, they feel like they have better luck, um, kind of cementing their immortality by achieving something versus doing it the old-fashioned way of having a child. I actually haven't articulated this for myself, and I don't think I will now. In the limited time we have, but yeah, there's also like I've noticed, maybe less so actually recently, but I've noticed that there's kind of like contempt and disparaging of motherhood because so many people do it and it's not really kind of a high achievement or a high accomplishment. But this really is, I mean, you're in for a treat. This is really like the hardest job in the world. And anybody who says otherwise doesn't get it because, you are responsible not only for like the immediate day to day survival of another organism, but for kind of their future intellectual and spiritual development, which is like crucial. And you, especially if you're doing it like on your own, I'm mentally ill enough that I have no intention of like hiring a nanny. I have my sister babysit on the odd moments that like we need somebody to watch him, but it's basically right now it's all me because like my husband can't. He is very supportive and helpful, but there's very little that like a man can do in the moment, um, for a child that's like under 6 months old.
Yeah, yeah, and I feel like that's just the phase of life you're in. It's very hard to delegate this stuff. My mom is my neighbor, but I can, there's gonna
How's that
be,
working for you?
it's okay. It's, I'm kind of at that point where I've overcome my tensions with her, and it's just, it's kind of the idea of, how will she be with the child, because if it's just rehashing what happened in the past 2.0, then I might have some
Yeah.
issues with that. But I think people do evolve and they do mature a little bit when they have grandchildren, and she's just mellowed out with age, I think, also.
Yeah. Well, also, I mean, they're literally like absolving, expiating their guilt, all the shitty parenting they did with you. So that, grandparents are always nice to their grandkids, and they give them lots of love and lots of money. But yeah, I mean, I think like the idea of like, self-actualizing, like, I mean, I'm very selfish in this sense. Like, I have, some level of ambition. I still want to do stuff, uh, kind of career wise in the future. But I've also like kind of chilled out and mellowed out because I really, at the end of the day, don't care if it happens so much anymore. Um, but I think like the idea of self-actualizing through kind of external achievements, through work or creativity, um, that route is available to a very small percentage of people, just like self-actualizing under feminism was
Yeah.
available to a very small percentage of people. Like you look at women like Susan Sontag or Gloria Allred, who had both had children when they were like 20 years old and went on to have like illustrious careers. Um, that was the exception to the rule. I mean, it still is the exception to the rule, I think. And in both cases, they sort of literally pawned off their kids to like family members or like the help.
Yeah. Yeah, it's gonna be interesting to see how people manage this, especially because I feel like a lot of women are starting to wake up to the fact that you just have to work in a 9 to 5 corporation for like 5 to 10 years to get the epiphany that with every
Yeah,
level that you move up, there's maybe a little bit more money, but a lot more responsibility and a lot more sleepless nights, and when you get to the Fortune 500 company or whatever status you're aiming for, you're going to not be royalty. You're going to be stretched to the maximum because those people want their money's worth. It's not you're not just moving into the country club. It really is a lot of work, especially in these
yeah.
multinationals.
Yeah, I mean, this I'm kind of on the fence about because I don't know. Like, I know a lot of people who have basically scaled the greasy ladder and landed at the top and actually do very little work. Like, they parachute in every 2 weeks to like sign off on some font choices on a PowerPoint. Um, I think, women, because we're still new to power and new to having any sense of control, I think that we tend to like overwork
Hmm.
ourselves and
Yeah.
or tend to want to prove ourselves.
Yeah, which is exactly the wrong thing to do sometimes if you
Yeah,
want actual power. Actual power means not having to do that stuff.
right, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. So I know we're coming up on time a little bit. I wanted to ask you the question of the show, which is, do you have a subversive thinker? It could be a writer, whoever you think would be interesting for people to know about because they might be getting too little of the limelight in general. Someone who's, a hidden gem.
Um, well, I think I have to think about that, but I would say Janet Malcolm because she just died yesterday, and she's kind of like a wild card because on the surface she seems like a very kind of predictable uh, liberal elite writer who was preoccupied with her kind of immediate class and milieu. And I think actually she's the most subversive of them all because in a world of polemicists, she was kind of an anti-polemicist. And basically, she set she set or created a setting through discretion and interaction and allows her readers to draw their own conclusions about kind of the psychological landscapes of the people that she's profiling.
Hmm. Awesome. I just saw that on your Twitter. I haven't read
Yeah.
her before, but I will now. So yeah, Janet Malcolm. And also, is there anything that you want people to know about any projects that you're working on? Anything I can point people to?
Um, I'm like super superstitious, so I never like to talk about my projects ahead of time because I feel like I'm going to jinx myself. But I am currently working on some stuff if like my kid will allow it.
Good, good. It
I
doesn't.
basically I basically like sit here with like a note app on my phone and with the baby in this like boba wrap and write.
Oh, well, that's that's a very adaptable way to to continue building your legacy in both ways. So, yeah, it was excellent speaking to you. I mean, I think I've got a serious case of pregnancy brain in the heat today, and
Yeah.
yeah, I hope this was as fun for you as it was for me, and it was really really lovely to get to meet you finally.
Yeah, it was nice to meet you. I forgot to spin my wheels about the medical aspects of pregnancy, which can be another topic for another day, because I really kind of red pilled myself in the course of this pregnancy.
Really?
Yeah, but
Uh-oh.
that's another topic for
Okay,
another
perfect.
day.
Well, we'll leave it at that, and then we'll pick it up next time.
All right, thank
Cheers.
you, Alex. Have a
Thank
good
you.
one.
Cheers.